everyone. Welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Tree Talks Digging Deeper Part 2 series. My name is Chelsea, and I'm the Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement here at the Alumni Association, and we're so glad to have you with us today. Before we jump in, I want to take a moment and thank all of our attendees for being here. Some of you are CSU Alumni Association members, and thank you so much for your membership. It makes events like this possible and allows us to have resources like this one. I want to do a few housekeeping items as well since we're on YouTube today. We will have time for questions at the end, so please feel free to put those in the comment section. You will need a YouTube account for that, or you can log in via YouTube via your Gmail to YouTube. And you can also email me. I'll put in my email below, so you can email me any questions that you have, and I'll make sure to pass those along to Cami when we wrap up. So if you've been following our series for a while, you know Cami Long. Cami works for the Colorado State Forestry Service at the Grand Junction Field Office and is the Urban and Community Forestry Program Specialist and our resident tree guide throughout the series. If you missed part 1 of the tree series or our tree series from last year, you can find those on this YouTube page. All right, Cami, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining. So we're in part 2, which is choosing the right tree for long-term success. And if you remember our presentation, or if you go watch our presentation from last month, it was about you arrived at the nursery, but the tree you wanted wasn't there. So this presentation is going to be, you've arrived at the nursery, you've decided on a tree species, but there's a lot of options of that same species. Which tree do you choose to take home? So that's the goal of this presentation, is to help you feel comfortable in choosing the best tree for your landscape out of the dozen or so options that you have of that species. So we'll do a quick recap of going over landscape goals and reading the tree tags. And then we'll go into the tree characteristics and quality tree attributes. And then we'll end with some tree planting tips. So just as a reminder, you want to make sure that you're choosing a tree that's going to meet the goals of your landscape. And those can be one of these or many of these. It's not, it doesn't have to be something that's maybe my goal. It's what works for your landscape. So but you should know why you're planting a tree. So then you make sure those tree characteristics are going to meet the goals for your landscape. So if you want a shade tree, you don't want to be planting a crabapple, because those aren't going to be large enough to shade your home in a meaningful way. If you want wind protection, you're going to want something that has branches usually from bottom of the plant to the top of the plant and is usually evergreen, so that it's protecting wind year round. Because they're pretty is a great reason. I have a rose of Sharon in my backyard that blooms all summer long, and she's there because she's pretty. Visual barriers, again, something that's more got a dense crown. You want to choose a species that's going to meet those goals of having a dense crown. Ecological benefits, most trees are going to have some, but some will have more than others. And a place to hang your bird feeder is also a great reason to plant a tree. So just make sure you're choosing your tree based on what your needs are for your landscape. So this is a recap of last presentation, but if you did your research at home and then you arrive at the nursery and it doesn't have the tree that you wanted, what are some ways to try to prevent that from happening? And here's some options. One, some nurseries will have their inventory online, so you can check there. But you could also call the nursery to ask how many they have. You can also ask how many they have in stock, because that will let you know how quickly you need to get there. If you're in certain areas of the state, you might have multiple options for nurseries. So you could call multiple nurseries. If the closest one maybe doesn't have it, but there's another one down the road, give them a call to see if they have the species you're looking for. And then it doesn't hurt to have a couple tree species selected just as backups, because maybe you get there and there is a tree there, but it doesn't meet some of the information that I'll share with you as we move through this presentation. Like, there's some qualities about that specific stem and tree that you don't think you want to pay money for. And so it's good to have a backup tree species selection. So remember what characteristics you wanted that tree to have. So you want to remember and think about how tall and wide this tree will get and where you're going to put it on the landscape. You don't want to put a really big tree really close to your house or under a power line, or a tree that has branches from top to bottom too close to the road that could impact visibility. So you want to be thinking about how large this tree will be, and also in relation to its neighbors. You want to look at and think about what zone you'll be planting in. Most nurseries around you are going to be carrying trees that are already in your zone, but some might be on the cusp. I bought a Rose of Sharon when I first moved to Grand Junction that was on the cusp. And then that winter we had a cold snap and that tree did not make it. And so when I went to purchase another Rose of Sharon, or I get it replaced because it was within warranty, I chose a Rose of Sharon that was more centrally listed in my zone, so it wasn't on the cusp, and she's doing great. Some may list your temperatures. So if you note your zone down, also note down the temperature range for that zone, so you know that you're getting a tree within your range for where you're at. You want to consider if there's fruit on the tree or not. We'll talk about that in a second. How much sun is available at your planting site. If you have a shade-loving tree, they're not going to do as great if you put them in a really sunny area, and vice versa. How much water you can provide is really important. So if you're going to be putting it in the back 40 that isn't on an irrigation system, then you're going to want to select a tree that doesn't have as high water needs as something that could be watered through your irrigation system around your house. And the last one you want to consider with tree characteristics is your annual pruning. Some trees grow really fast. There's certain elm trees. Elm trees are not all bad. Siberian elm trees are a pain, but not all elm trees are Siberian elms. There's good elms out there, but they're very fast growing, as are box elder trees. And so if you're going to plant a fast growing tree, you need to have a plan of when you're going to be able to prune them consistently to make sure they have good shape as they move forward. And I did a pruning presentation last year that will be on the YouTube channel that you can go check out. So I just wanted to show you on this sign here that this is for a quaking aspen, which some areas around the state that might be a good option. Here it lists the species on it, so Populus tremuloides. So it's not a hybrid. It is a true quaking aspen tree. It tells you on the sign how tall it gets and the zone, but it doesn't list the number. It lists the temperature range. And so that's why it's good to know that what your zone is, but also the temperature range. So what I think is super fascinating about trees is that not all trees have both the female and the male flowers on them. So that means that you don't always, so there are some trees that don't have fruit. And so it's good to understand the difference between monoecious and dioecious trees. So monoecious, mono meaning one, meaning that both the male and female reproductive organs are on the same individual. Therefore, you cannot purchase trees that don't produce fruit. Examples of those are catalpas. You're always going to have the seed pod. If you buy a catalpa, it will always produce a seed pod. And same with oaks. You're always going to have an acorn if you buy an oak tree. You can't buy an acornless oak tree. While dioecious, dio meaning two, means that they have trees with male flowers on it and trees with female flowers on it. And so you can purchase the male trees that should remain fruitless. So ginkgo is an example where they have male and female trees. Certain parts of the country, you can find female ginkgo trees planted. The fruit is very, very stinky. And so it's not a desirable plant to choose a female ginkgo. So you want to be choosing a male ginkgo tree, and that's what you would purchase from the nursery. And then also with maple trees, this example is a female maple tree and it's called Hot Wings. So the female seed is actually desirable in this case, but a lot of people don't want the fruit or the samaras or the litter. And so if you purchase a male maple tree, then you won't have those seeds on the tree. So that's how it's good. You can look that up. You can type in catalpa, and then you can type in, does it have fruit or is it monoecious? And your search engine will be able to pull that information up. Reading those tree tags that are on the tree will give you a lot of information. Some of them are just those signs, like I showed you on that quaking aspen tree, but some will have full tree tags that have a whole bunch of information on there, including for this one is a heritage oak, Quercus McDanielii. And so that means that it's a hybrid because of that X right here. That means that it's not that this is not grown by an acorn, that this has been grafted to a root system to get the characteristics of that tree, of that parent tree. And so, which is great, but just know that it's not going to be like a bur oak, Quercus macropelli. I think I said that wrong. So if it's not a hybrid, then it's grown from an acorn. If it's a hybrid or a variety, then it's going to be a cultivated, grafted tree. And so that's important to know for when you are looking at the base of the tree when you're selecting it. Then it will also be telling you information, the zone, the height, the spread, the shape, the foliage color, the fall color, if there's any disease issues. Some of them will tell you that on plane trees. So we used to plant a lot of American sycamore, but they get a disease called anthracnose. And so London plane trees, this is a plane tree, it's an exclamation, so it's a cultivar, is more resistant to anthracnose. So it's more desirable to be planted so you don't have to deal with the anthracnose. So it will give you some good information on what this tree's characteristics are, how much sun exposure, what soil type it prefers, again, how big it gets. So this is some information if you're like not super sure, if you're deciding between a couple trees, the information on the tree tags can be really helpful. However, it doesn't always give you the full story. So the purple robe locust is a beautiful tree, but they have a borer that attacks them. And it's like hand in hand. If you have a purple robe locust, you likely will get the borer if you're not preventing it. And so if you don't do a Google search or an internet search to make sure that there's no insect issues, I just typed in purple robe locust, insect or disease issues. And it pulled up right away that it's very susceptible to the locust borer. And so if you don't want to deal with insect management, then this isn't the tree for you. And so just the tags don't always give the whole story. So it's good to look at that information or get more information online before committing to a tree if you weren't able to do your research before you arrived. Tree size, it's, oh, darn it. I didn't realize I didn't make that picture appear. So the point of this is that tree size, the bigger the tree, the more money it costs. So actually, I think I did it the wrong way. So in this case, we have a Newport plum in a number 7 pot. That's what that number number sign 7 means. And then this one, if you can see, it says number 10. And so that's just a bigger pot. So it's $185, for example, here. In this smaller pot, number 7 is $135. And then as they get larger, they will start, this is a number 15 pot. And now this 1 1/4, that's the caliper measurement of that tree. On these, these other ones, they're smaller, and so they're just listing the current height of that stem. So this one in a number 7 says 6 to 7 feet, and the number 10 here says, that's really small, 6 to 8 feet. So it's not that much taller, but it's $50 more. And then when you get into the number 15, the 1 1/4 inch, it's $300. Granted, it's a bur oak versus a plum. But the point is that the larger the tree you get, the more expensive it is. And there's a rule of thumb with trees is that the size of that stem, the caliper, so say it's an inch on these smaller number 7s and 10s, will take about a year to establish in the landscape, meaning that it will take about a year for the root system to grow and get established in the landscape before it can start focusing on growing the canopy of the tree. So if you get a 3-inch tree, ball and burlap, it's a huge tree when you put it in the ground. it will take 3 years for that root system to get established before it can start growing the canopy. But if you buy a smaller tree, a 1.5 inch tree, it's going to take a lot less time for it to get that root system established in the ground before then it will start growing the canopy and get larger quicker. So just keep in mind that you don't need to be buying a larger tree to get that instant landscape, because if you buy a smaller tree, it will get established faster and then get established in the landscape quicker. So let's get to the meat of the presentation, is what to look for in the nursery. And you want to be focusing on looking for, if you're buying a shade tree, you want to buy something with a single stem. So here we have 2 trees of the same species. We have one that has a bunch of leaders. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 leaders. And so if you put this in the ground without pruning it, all 5 of these are going to grow up and larger as the tree grows, and you're going to have structure issues as the tree is growing. And if you watch the pruning presentation, you know that there's likely to have some co-dominant leaders or included bark as this gets to mature in the landscape, which puts the tree at risk for damage in snow and rain storms that we know we get all across Colorado. So you want to choose one that has a single leader, a single dominant leader in that canopy. And so this one, like, I could fix that, sure. Or by pruning, I would reduction prune, called head back. I would head back each one of these side branches so they were shorter than this one. I'd keep this one as my leader, prune back, prune back, prune back, prune back. Or I could just get one that already has a single leader and I don't have to do as much or any work in the canopy when I'm planting it. The same is definitely true for conifer trees. So this is in the nursery, but we have a pinyon with 2 leaders, 1 and 2. And here is a blue spruce with 2 leaders, 1 and 2. And you do not want to have a conifer tree having multiple leaders. That's definitely, you're going to have included bark. The likelihood of failure on one of those stems of one of the leaders is high, with the weight of those branches always having needles on them. So there was plenty of trees in this landscape of trees for sale at this nursery that had single leaders. And so if you didn't know, you're like, just that pinion's fine. And if you chose this one, that's a lot of, that's harder to prune and manage when you have 2 leaders. You'd have to reduction prune one of these, and then you'd have this weird space in the canopy that looked funny. So really pay attention if you're getting a conifer that you want a single leader. Above ground and root system vigor is really important to pay attention to. You want to make sure the tree is healthy, that the leaf color is appropriate. So not all trees have green leaves. That's why I'm not saying make sure the color is green, because you have the purple leafed plum trees. So you want to just make sure that the color looks correct for that species that you're choosing. You want to make sure that it has a balanced branch structure. Not all the branches are jammed up on one part of the tree or all on the same side. You want to make sure that it's balanced around. And you want to make sure there's a proper crown to root ball size. So my husband here is a little over 6 feet tall. This is your standard, I think it's like a number 10 pot. And this tree is like 12 feet tall. For this size pot, that is not acceptable. You do not want to buy a tree that tall with that small of a root system. This is at a box store, and this tree has probably not sold. So they sent it back to cold storage, and they brought it back the next year and it didn't sell. So they sent it to cold storage. Like, this has been in that pot for a very long time. And so, but it keeps growing because that's what trees do. And so now the root ball to crown ratio is completely off. This is probably more like 6 feet in here on these. The tree should be in this range of height, not double his height. And then you also want to look at the root system, and you can pull the pot off to make sure that the root system is healthy and hasn't been in the pot for too long. And so that's what we did. Is here, that's the tree that what he was holding that was 12 feet tall. These are huge woody roots that are going around this tree. The bottom is like all roots, and there's so much root in there, there's not as much soil. And so to fix this root system before you put it in the ground would be very, very stressful on this tree. If they gave it to me for free, sure, I would try it, but I would not pay money for a root system like that. So this one I put meh next to it because these aren't as big and woody, but there is a lot of roots going on here. And so if I pulled the pot off and saw this, I would prefer not to purchase it. I would look at other trees to see if other root systems weren't as heavily rooted. And if I was really committed to that species, then this could be addressed, but it wouldn't be my top priority. So this is an example of what happens when you don't address the circling roots that are in that pot. So this X here, that's where the tree was planted. You can see that darkened part on this trunk, that's the soil line. And the green here, that's where it should have been planted. So it was planted a couple inches deep. But here are those circling roots. So that's what this here, that's what they looked like after being in the ground, is they just get bigger and they continue in that circling pattern. They don't correct themselves by taking a right-hand turn and turning into the soil. They just keep circling. And so this tree obviously didn't get very big before it died. And a lot of that was A, it was planted too deep, and B, the root system was never able to establish in the landscape because it just was kept circling. So you'd want to look for root issues at the nursery. This is, you can see, in a container. It came from the nursery with this girdling root wrapping around the trunk. You do not want to purchase a tree that has any visible root issues, especially this circling, because this is what it can become, is it just grows larger. As the tree grows larger, that girdling root grows larger. And now this will be pressing on the trunk as it grows larger, preventing and restricting water and nutrients from moving up and down that trunk. You want to look for healthy looking growth. So these were both taken in the nursery. So this is the length of, I should have made my check marks green, but this was like good new growth. This was a good amount of new growth. This was a tree planted in the landscape. There is zero new growth on that tree. It just grew directly from the bud and put no new growth on. And so if you were looking at a tree in the nursery and you saw that there was no new growth coming out of that bud, it was just leaves coming directly out of the old bud with no new growth. This is good. This is where the new the new tip is and where growth will be coming all along this. That's good. If there's no new growth, no expansion, then that means the tree is stressed. There's something wrong with the root system. That is not something you want to spend money on because that tree is not doing well. You also want to look at trunk sprouts. These are, or root sprouts. So on these trees, you can see here that there's a few of them that have trunks. I keep saying trunk sprouts, I'm sorry. These are sprouts that are coming from the root system. And so that means that the root system is pretty vigorous. These are going to be grafted trees. I did a presentation as well on more in depth on tree planting. And so I go into a lot more detail on grafting trees. So that's in the YouTube from last year. But if you see a tree that has suckers coming from the roots, you don't want to buy that because that means that root system is going to be pretty vigorous. You don't want to be dealing with plant suckers as you manage that tree and it grows in your landscape. Try to choose a tree that does not have any root suckers coming out of the base. This is what happens when you let the root suckers grow. This tree, they paid money for a red-leafed plum tree, but they let the root system grow, which was a green-leafed crabapple. I'm sorry, a green-leafed plum. And so now this tree is half red, which is what they paid money for, and half green, which is the root system, which was not what they desired. The two trees beyond this in the landscape are this beautiful red plum color. And so that's what happens when you let the root system grow, is that it doesn't have the desired characteristics of the cultivar variety that you bought. And so it's not as desired in the landscape. You want to make sure there's no health issues on that tree. So you don't want to see any scale. You don't want to see any browning or tip dieback. You want to make sure that the tree is healthy. You don't want to pay money for a damaged product. So those are the main things that you want to be paying attention to in the nursery when you're choosing your tree. So single leaders for shade trees and conifers. Choose a tree that has good vigor in its crown, new growth. You want to look at the root system, make sure there's nothing circling in that pot, or you don't want a really dense amount of roots in there. And then you want to make sure there's no health issues as well. So real quick on proper tree planting. First, you want to call or go online to colorado811.org about a week or two before you're going to plant. And it's super easy to go on their website and fill out where you're going to be planting, and they'll confirm that there is or isn't any lines, gas, power, fiber where you're wanting to plant, and it's free. So make sure you're doing that. Our trees are typically planted too deeply. If you think about how a kid draws a tree, there's always a flare to it when they draw the tree. But what we plant are telephone poles, trees going directly into the ground with no flare. But they should have a flare. This is a tree in the forest out here on the Grand Mesa. It's got this beautiful flare. I went to New Zealand, so I had to throw a New Zealand photo in here. But look at this beautiful flare coming off this tree here. And then this is a tree that I planted in Fort Collins for my mother-in-law. I planted it, so it better have a tree flare and look good. And so you can see the tree has roots that are coming off the trunk that are flaring out. And that's what we should have, not these trees that go straight into the ground. We need that root flare at soil line. And so the way that the trees come in the nursery is this graft is usually what's that soil line. And because most trees that we're buying these days are grafted with the desired tree grafted to a root system. And this bulge on the trunk, that's that graft point. It is not the tree flare. And so you need to be digging down into the pot to find the roots that are sweeping off the trunk. And so these kind of roots that are coming out at a 90-degree angle, they're not the primary roots. They're called adventitious roots. They're just growing because soil is against the trunk. And so you want to look for the roots, again, that are sweeping off of the trunk. You can see here, they're sweeping, they're part of the trunk, they're sweeping off the trunk. They're not coming out at those straight, they're not coming straight out of the trunk. So in these two cases, as I was digging down to find the flare, they were a good 4 inches deep in the pot. And so when people plant at the same level that they get them in, from the nursery, they're usually planting their trees too deep, and then the trees really struggle. And then as you're digging down for that flare, you might come across those girdling roots under the soil versus that one photo I just showed of the girdling root that was above soil line. Often you're going to find these girdling roots under the soil as you're digging down to find that flare. And so you want to take hand pruners and clip those off and remove them. So here's one right here. And so you want to clip those off to make sure that they cannot continue, because as that gets larger and the trunk gets larger, again, they're going to grow into each other, and it will restrict the flow of water and nutrients up and down this tree. So to determine, you don't dig your hole until you have determined where your root flare is, because it's usually 2 to 4 inches deep in that container. And so wait to dig your planting hole until you've determined where your root flare is. And your hole should be saucer shaped and 2 to 3 times the root ball. So you can see here that it's a nice wide hole that's not that deep, because most of our trees, once you find that root flare, are not very deep. And so you've got this nice wide, large hole that's saucer shaped. You don't need to add backfill. You need that tree to grow out into this soil here. So if you make the planting hole soil too nice, they don't want to come out here. So you've got to, they're going to have to get out here eventually. So don't make your soil the Marriott when you have Super 8 soil everywhere else. So once you put the tree, you found the flare, you've dug this really nice wide saucer shaped hole, you put the tree in there, and then you have to deal with the girdling roots. Trying to move through this here quite quickly because I know I've hit the 1:30 mark, but we'll get through this real quick. So if you have anytime I'm planting a container tree, no matter if I can see roots on the edge or not, I'm shaving the root ball, where I'm taking my handsaw that I set aside just for tree planting, because I obviously plant a lot of trees in my job, and I'm taking about 1 inch to 1.5 inches off the edge of the root ball. I'm just coming straight down, cutting the edge of that root ball off. So any roots that are circling now are not there anymore. You have those new fresh roots that will grow out into the soil. So you're basically taking a round root ball and turning it into a square or a hexagon or however many sides you cut. But now you have fresh roots that are growing straight out into the root system, into the soil, and not circling anymore. You've taken away that circling pattern by shaving the edge of the root ball off. So all those fresh roots will grow out into your soil profile. So this is what your goal should be. You should see a root flare at the soil, a nice large planting hole, and you can add mulch. You just don't want the mulch touching the trunk. So again, the bud graft should be well above soil line. Your root collar, where your root flare is, should be at or above soil line. And then you'll need to make sure you have dealt with the circling roots by shaving your root ball. I have put this all together in a lovely guide. You can take a picture if you're on a computer with your phone with this QR code. You can go to your search engine of choice and type in Colorado State Forest Service plant a container tree, and it will pull up this document with pictures and all the information I just shared with you about how to properly plant a tree, or watch the YouTube video from last year where I went much more in depth and not as quickly on how to properly plant a tree. So now I'm hoping that you feel comfortable that if you go to a nursery, you know which tree to choose. If there's a dozen different stems, you feel comfortable in choosing the right one that will do well in your landscape. So thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you, Cami. Every time you get done, I just feel so energized to leave work and go plant a tree. I'm just ready for it. So we did have a few questions come in.
Great.
So I will just ask you those and let you answer. So one was, what is the best, or maybe your recommended tree variety that's drought intolerant?
The ones that seem to, so I'm in Grand Junction, and there's a couple trees that seem to do well even without irrigation. One of them, surprisingly, is a catalpa. We have some catalpas that are growing here in Grand Junction that don't get much irrigation water, and they're doing really well. So do Kentucky coffee trees. Those you can get without seed pods. So those are, like I said, the catalpas will always have the bean pod, but their flowers are just astonishingly beautiful. They look like orchids. They got the big heart-shaped leaves. And then in Kentucky coffee trees, they have a really cool leaf. It's a leaf on a leaf on a leaf. It's the leaves are very pretty, but they are not very pretty trees when they're young. We call them the ugly ducklings because they're kind of a stick. When you get them, you're like, Cami, why are you suggesting this tree? It's so boring. But it's because the leaves are so big, but when they fall off, there's nothing left on the tree because it's a compound leaf. And but they have male and female trees, so you can get them with or without pods. So those seem to be doing well. Oaks do well without a lot of water. But I can definitely provide some more information for people who have attended on some other species, but those are some good ones.
Awesome. Thank you. And then you talked about the purple plum having the suckers on them that turn into the green plum. Is there a way that you can get rid of those suckers before planting, or do you just avoid that tree altogether?
So you don't know anything about the root stock that they have attached your tree to. It could be a purple leafed root stock, or it could be a green leaf root stock. You don't know. So you want to just make sure you're maintaining the maintenance of those trees that have root suckers. You just prune them off. And you want to prune them off at the point of origin where they're coming off the root, and try not to hedge them because that looks very unattractive. and it's just it's mostly very unattractive. It's not good for the tree to kind of hedge those suckers. So anytime you see a sucker, you dig down, you prune it off, and you don't have to worry about it getting large. There are some trees that are called like sucker stopper chokecherry, and that's because that root system that they've grafted it to has been shown that it doesn't sucker to the same level as other root systems out there. So if there's something with like a sucker stopper or sucker punch in their name, then likely they've grafted it to a rootstock that doesn't sucker as much, and so you could choose those kind of trees.
And this is just my question adding on to that. Are the suckers, when you're out on a walk looking at a tree, are those the little stalks that are coming up that almost look like baby plants of the tree?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, right at the base of the tree. And so if it's coming, you'll see the graft on the trunk. If a sprout is coming from above the root graft, then that's the tree that you've paid for. If it's coming below that graft, then it's going to be that root system's sucker. And sometimes those root systems are just really vigorous and they're like, I want to play too. And you don't want them to play. You need to cut them off.
Perfect. And then the final question that I had is, was there a good time of year to go to the nursery to plant a tree?
Yeah, I prefer to go to the nursery in the spring. The fall, the nurseries will have sales, but those are the trees that have been left over and picked over and have more issues than the ones that you would get when they're fresh off the truck. They've also been growing in that pot now all summer, and so that root system is going to be getting bigger in that pot. And so you definitely need to make sure that if you buy a tree in the fall that you should always address the circling roots by shaving the root ball, but you're going to have potentially larger roots if you wait till the fall because it's grown all summer in that pot. I prefer that. There's nothing wrong with planting in the fall, but the question was, when would I go? What do I recommend of going to the nursery? And it would be the spring.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Cami. This has been so helpful as always. We always appreciate your time. And then if you have not yet registered for our final Tree Talk series on May 28th, Cami's going to be teaching us how to recognize potential problems and keep our trees healthy from common insects and diseases. So if you have any specific questions regarding this topic, please feel free to email them to me or anything that you want as we go into this. So my email's right there, chelsea.wiseman@colostate.edu.
Yes. Yeah, if you have a specific tree question that you have with regards to pests or abiotic or biotic pests, so abiotic being environmental factors and biotic being a living organism causing problems, I'm happy to make sure I address those in that presentation. So email Chelsea or myself, and I'll get that in the presentation.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Cami, and thank you all for joining us.
Yes, thank you for sticking around.